The name of this panel is From Rules to Roads, Governing the Future of AVs and Zero Emissions Mobility, and I would love to introduce our moderator, Karina Ricks.
All right. Thank you. I hope we can get a few more people here. I know there's a lot of competing interests at the conference, but we've got a great panel here that represents both elected officials, experienced administrators, private sector agencies. So what we really want to talk about is that mobility is changing quickly, and oftentimes much more quickly than the regulations and the policy frameworks to manage it. And so while these technologies that might be new form factors or automation, electrification, digital infrastructure are moving, we need them to kind of work within proper guidance so that we're able to advance the public policy objectives that we have, so that we're really able to seize the good that these technologies can bring. The problem, though, is often that regulation can't keep up. And so while we're asking, it's not will innovation will happen. It's when and how will we deploy it. So we're really going to look at how we balance that innovation, how agencies can be innovators themselves, partners with technology, really lead and ask wise questions. Can you hear me okay? I don't know. Okay, great. I'm fantastic. So we're going to have our panelists share real-world experiences, some of their observations, both from Europe as well as throughout the US in scaling these. So I'm going to start with some introductions of our panel. Pier Francesco Maran was elected as an Italian member to the European Parliament in 2024. He entered public service in 2006 as a district councillor before becoming a Milan municipal councillor. He was later appointed by Mayor Pisapia to oversee mobility and environment, and reappointed by Mayor Sala as the head of urban planning, housing, and neighborhood policy. And this was interesting to me. He's the author of a book, Visible Cities, Where the Nation's Change Begins, which ultimately became a theater production. So I would like to observe, right? There you go. All right. John Erickson was elected to the West Hollywood City Council in 2020 on a platform of social and economic justice. He's been a public servant for more than 15 years. He's worked in legislative and public affairs for LAX, Planned Parenthood, and the Alliance for a Better Community. Councilmember Erickson is committed to expanding housing affordability, reducing vehicle traffic, fighting climate change, and he's been a fearless advocate for women and LGBTQ plus rights, which I appreciate. So thank you for your leadership there. Jackie Bacharach serves as the executive director of the South Bay Council of Governments that is a district just west of Los Angeles. Jackie has a long track record of public service in the region, having served on the LA County Transportation Commission, chairing the creation of the rail system in LA County, the Metrolink commuter rail system, the LA to San Diego Amtrak service, and the Alameda Corridor access to the ports of LA and Long Beach. Jackie is a former elected official, having been the mayor and councilperson in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. And then finally, Tom Ashley has an extensive background in clean energy, transportation, and electrification. Tom leads policy, regulatory, and government and utility relations for Volterra, a clean tech enterprise that develops, owns, and operates charging infrastructure to enable and support a carbon-free transportation future. Tom's private sector pedigree includes leadership positions with Greenlots, which became Shell Recharge Solutions, and PlugShare. He's also been in the public service with time spent in the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works and the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Vermont Department of Public Service, and the California Public Utility Commission. So we want to begin with just a dialogue with our panelists. And so there's a trope that private sector innovators avoid policy as an obstacle, while public sector regulators only use policy as a bludgeon. In reality, public officials need new innovations to enable better services for their people, where private enterprise needs consistent and reasonable public policy for their solutions to go to scale predictably and profitably. And so I'd like to kind of have you go one by one, if you can, and just talk a little bit about what are the initiatives that you're working in? How do you see this partnership between public sector leadership, private sector provision of services, and how can we really use that as an opportunity to achieve public good while enabling private enterprise? Pier Francisco, if you want to begin.
Hello, good afternoon. I come from a different point of view and approach from here. Even my visit here is also to see some of the innovation actually we don't have in Europe. Of course, we have a different approach. But as far as I see, I would mention another point on the difference among USA and Europe. That is the financial structure around innovation. If we talk about autonomous vehicles, for example, all the main companies operating, they invested more or less more than $1 billion. That is something at the moment not affordable for European autonomous car sector. So this is, in my opinion, the first point. It's much connected not only on mobility, but also on AI and other systems. If innovation becomes so expensive, you need capital, and there is much capital available in some other part of the world. Then there is another point that is the difference of approach on innovation. So here you have more an approach, let's try and fix, while we have a more conservative approach. So we approve innovation when we are sure it is safe. That in this point, it's a losing approach, honestly, because definitely we don't have services and we are still on a prototype aspect. The role I'm trying to interpret in the European Parliament in this moment is to push okay, we need to be safe and it's important, and sometimes even the way we regulate, it's then copied by USA. So it's important to have good regulation, but now we have to try to move a little faster, because otherwise we don't have services on one hand, and we don't have companies producing those services. And I think 2026 is a sort of last call for it. That is why I'm making pushes, events, and trying to create also the cultural condition in the European Parliament to see that we have to move faster. It's a technology we don't have. So when we talk about autonomous vehicle, it's like future, not present like you see on your streets.
So, John, maybe you can talk a little bit about what's happening in West Hollywood. And as we say, it's good to be open-minded, but not so open that your brain falls out. You know, what are you doing and what are you looking for in terms of new innovations, new technologies, and how to put sort of, you know, the proper guardrails on them?
Well, hello. Nice to see you all. I'm John. I'm a council member and former mayor in West Hollywood. My brain's usually falling out for other reasons, but that's a whole nother panel discussion. You know, I think the thing that we're looking at in West Hollywood, as I kind of said this earlier, is that we try to say yes and, right? So our residents and our businesses really want to utilize new technologies. We saw this when remember the early days of this when it was Uber and Lyft, and they were like, oh yeah, we need to figure out drop-off zones. So how do you do that? It was like the simplest like urban planning fixes. And you know, in West Hollywood, we have one or two really sought after nightclubs and restaurants. And so they oftentimes have a lot of traffic impacts, right? But if you use autonomous vehicles or have smart cities, and if your city is leading into smart cities initiatives, you can actually make things better. And so a lot of the things in West Hollywood we've been looking at are along those lines, but moving forward with Waymo, with scooter, technology for driving outside of a car, our little Serve Robotics friends that we always say hello to, because when the robots take over, they'll remember if you said hello, yes, and thank you, Jackie, for delivering your Thai food. And they will. I fully believe this. That's my conspiracy hole I go down. But I think most importantly, then we have to balance that on regulations for our neighborhoods and I think an age gap, right? In the ways that people say it there and they say, well, there's a scooter blocking the sidewalk, and we all as a council can agree. Well, none of us want that to happen. So how do we use the technology to geo-fence or to get better patterns into the work that we do where things are not allowed to park so they can't actually lock the vehicle itself? Or how do we use our public-private partnerships to enhance the ability for robots to move around or to enhance where we need to actually improve our streets the most. And I think most importantly, the yes and approach that we've had at the City of West Hollywood needs a regional focus on it, because what we do in West Hollywood can't just stop at our borders, right? If you try to go past Doheny on a scooter, let me know how you feel when you enter Beverly Hills. Our good friends in Beverly Hills, they don't allow for it, right? But there is a demand for us to think smarter, and that's where it's really great to have a council of governments here as well who has to holistically look at this approach. And it is a little bit more political and a force that we've been seeing coming into New Age in politics, whereas the West Side now in Culver City, Santa Monica, West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and the other areas surrounding us, Los Angeles, are more forward thinking by saying yes to this. So we're implementing patterns where one technology doesn't exist in this city and one doesn't in this one, and then the state regulates over here. And so I think having that approach allows us to be innovative. It allows us to actually give our residents and businesses what they want. In West Hollywood, I think the number of the last year and a half of our program for our scooter pilot program was around 300,000 to 400,000 uses in like a year and a half to 2 years, which is like 10 times the population of our city, and they're all taking place within. That's a car off the road. So we can see success stories like this, and this is how we model it with our friends at all levels.
Yeah. And Jackie, I'm so glad that you're here. As you know, South Bay Cities has been doing some really pioneering work, literally laying the policy groundwork to enable and empower different kinds of form factors, low-speed vehicles, different, more sustainable modes of transportation. I'd love for you to talk about, one, what you've been doing, but also what is the power of that policy to kind of juice the market and to make that happen, and what are the limitations of it?
Well, that's a tall order. The South Bay Cities Council of Governments, first of all, are the 16 cities between the Port of Los Angeles and the airport. So we're every ethnicity, we're every mountains, we're valleys, we're poor, we're rich. It's a really great microcosm. And we believe at the Council of Governments, we have two things we do for cities. One is we add value so that we're not really creating more work for them unnecessarily. And second is that we look into the future. And by looking into the future, we can outline the trends and look at how people are going to be living and getting around and what they're going to be expecting from their governments. And the two big signature projects that I'll just mention is in 2016, we looked at fiber because we were very worried about not being ready for fiber to come into the South Bay in sufficient forms for economic development. We found out that our cities were paying way too much money, and we created the South Bay Fiber Network, which links all of our city halls. We're working on expanding that now, but it's something, the biggest problem we had was that the cities didn't realize that very shortly they were going to need more bandwidth than they had. They hadn't even given it any thought. So we were ahead of that. The other thing is in about 2012-13, we did a survey of how people get around the South Bay. For any of you that know us, we have very poor transit. And so how do we create greenhouse gas emission savings? How do we reduce congestion? What do we do? And we created, with the Air Quality Management District, a neighborhood electric vehicle project. We gave our participants, I shouldn't say everybody, our participants an electric vehicle, neighborhood electric vehicle, which is like a nice golf cart, for 3 months at a time with GPS on it. And we learned that 70% of our trips were 3 miles or less. Well, no one is taking transit if they're going to stand on a corner to go 1 mile. So we didn't go and push the transit. We tried to look at other factors, and that's where micromobility came up. And we decided that if people had neighborhood electric vehicles, if they weren't considered toys, but they were considered actually a mode of travel, if they took their electric bike and put a cargo stand on the back of it, if they took a scooter, a Segway, anything that's zero emission, low speed, then we would get cars off the road. And I should say that at that time there were like 289,000 second, third, and fourth cars in people's homes. So everybody could keep their first car, we didn't care, but like get rid of your third or your fourth car. In order to do that, to promote neighborhood electric vehicles, we established what we call our local travel network. And the local travel network is identifying slow-speed streets where there is a great, safe way to cross a major street. And we're identifying those in each of our cities so that we can have a network where you can actually go from El Segundo all the way to San Pedro, eventually in the South Bay, on a bike or on a neighborhood electric vehicle and do it safely. We stayed ahead. The policy has not caught up with us. In order to promote this, we try to work with our vendors. Unfortunately, vendors in this arena are very small and don't have a lot of bandwidth. So, it's very hard to find, where do you test drive a neighborhood electric vehicle? So we've met a lot of hurdles along the way, but we believe this is the right thing to do. And we just recently got another statistic, which I think is fascinating, and that's that 138,000 trips a day that go by car in the South Bay are less than a half a mile.
Oh, wow.
So I'll stop there.
Wow, that's great. And Tom, you have a really unique perspective on this because you've been a public regulator, you've been at the national level, now you're in the private sector. I mean, what can you tell us about how regulation and policy can really help be an enabling factor for the decarbonization of transportation, for some of the other, preferred enhancements that we want from a public policy objective?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Volterra develops charging facilities. So we acquire real estate, we bring capital, and then we build charging facilities and work with our partners or customers on operating them once they're up and running. I've worked most of my career on policy. What I really learned when I joined Volterra a couple years ago is that policy is only one piece of the puzzle. Right. Process is a really big piece, especially when you're in the ground trying to develop projects. So I think a couple things I would share. So there are we work with primarily cities on the land use side and utilities and their regulators and boards on energizing projects and determining where it's going to be feasible to bring power to the projects in the first place. There's a lot of policy that's pretty good around these areas. There is policy that's still being developed. We're working on some of it right now.
Right.
So that includes land use policy and zoning, and it's around what for a lot of communities is a new concept. EV charging as a primary use, not something that's somewhere in a parking lot, but the whole facility is designed around EV charging as the primary purpose. Most cities are very open to or excited about that use case and the type of investment that we bring, but in most cases, their zoning codes aren't up to date. And so we work collaboratively with cities on the policy side to either develop new code or new ordinance, or a little bit between policy and process, help cities interpret their existing code to enable this type of use and investment. On the utility side, a lot of utilities are, quite frankly, only as good as the regulatory policy and the landscape that they're operating within. So that utility regulatory policy, which is most relevant in jurisdictions where there is a state regulator, the utility is an investor-owned regulated entity, Like, those are the rules of the road for the utility. And so they are constrained or enabled by that utility regulatory policy. And that policy generally has been designed as a reactive policy. Right. So when a utility gets an application for a new thing, whether that's a charging facility, a manufacturing facility, a new mall, what have you, then they react to that and develop the system capacity to support it. That's not working for EV charging facilities when fleets and other customers are looking for sites to go online much faster than, let's call it, business as usual. And so there's a lot of policy change and innovation that is implicated and is in process in that utility regulatory space. But really, process is where a lot of communities, authorities having jurisdiction, and utilities live. Because policy change sometimes can take a long time. Sometimes it takes a while to implement policy change. So even though the policy has changed, it takes a while to implement it. And so that process is where we really spend a lot of time with those partners in the city space and in the utility space to try to gain efficiencies, because business as usual unfortunately doesn't work for our industry and our customers. And so rather than, I guess I'll say, being very frustrated, which sometimes we are, we try to work collaboratively with those entities to find ways to do things faster or to remove unnecessary or potentially redundant steps that are no longer implicated with this type of project or context.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that and maybe have everybody jump in. And how do you really accelerate policy innovation, right? Like and I'm sure Europe is not much different than we are here in the US, is that policy is a very agonizingly slow and deliberate process, which has there's an upside to that, right? It's a feature, not a bug sometimes, but it really, when we can see the benefits that some of these innovations are going to bring. Jackie, you talked about, neighborhood electric vehicles, not legal in many states to go on the road. We know that they could serve a really important use, not legal. Charging infrastructure as a land use is not in a lot of zoning codes right now. Autonomous vehicles, the scooters, all of these things, we can see the use cases of where these would be really good public outcomes, but the public policies are not in place for us to really achieve and enable and grab those positive outcomes. So how do we accelerate policy innovation? How do we, John, to your point, how do we say yes when the policies are so gray or undefined? Go ahead.
I think you have to take the proposal on its own, and one size doesn't fit all. We went to I'll tell you my horror stories. We went to the California Resources Board and said we wanted to have a rebate for neighborhood electric vehicles, because why shouldn't we help people and accelerate the market? And they said, well, they have a lithium-ion battery. Well, so were they going to help us create something that worked? Were they going to try this as a pilot so we could all see it and see how it worked? No, they just said, no, go, leave. Our policy doesn't allow you to do that. No going around the edges or looking at what could be possibly done. And we run into that all the time. We run into the agencies, the state agencies that just set up a rule, and then you have to work within it, and it doesn't. And that rule was set up before the internet, before your phone was in your hand, before Waymo came. And so we have to not be cautious about trying things. And that's one reason why we believe in pilots. Because when you pilot something, the politicians all can say, well, we tried, we're reaching out. It can fail, and you have a good way to, okay, we tried. But then it can also work, and it can also tell you how to revise something and make it a better idea. And so I think we need more flexibility to reach into the future and establish things that we can see will work.
Question?
Can I say something conservative?
Yes.
No, I think sometimes we have also to protect innovation from innovators.
Yep.
I give some example. Some years ago, many European cities got invaded by free-floating bike sharing from Chinese company. They said they will give us thousands of bikes. They gave us thousands of bikes. They got data of the use, and then they left the bike and escaped. Many cities, my city spend money to rescue all the bikes left from one day to the next from those companies because they don't need anymore to have the system. After pandemic, we open the market to moped from one day to the next. The result was that the first 2 years we had a very high number of injuries because people tried moped but they don't know how to use it and they got injured. And pedestrians hated moped. In Paris there was a referendum and they banned free-floating moped. So I think that innovation like autonomous vehicle should be protected on some other aspect. I give another example. Okay, now if we see California, they are increasing their market quotas year after year. It's impressive. But what happens when they will cost really less than a Uber, and they will arrive from one day to the next in a city and say, okay, now you as a customer, you can go to a driver, and or you can use the same service but without spending less. We have also to manage the externalities of innovation, and it's not so easy. It doesn't mean that we need to use rules to slow down innovation, but we should use the rule of institution to imagine that the fact that innovation is disruptive in a positive way in sometimes, but we should protect part of the community to the disruptive negative effect that could be very important. And I think it also changed the role of legislators. So how can you learn what is new and to take the good part of the innovation?
Done?
Yeah, I kind of have a rule that, like, if you don't use it, you probably shouldn't regulate it. Like, I always say, you know, like, I mean, well, it goes true with, like, Republicans and women, but that's a whole nother topic as well. But, like, I just think that, like, if you've never used a Waymo, or if you've never used Uber and Lyft, some people physically can't use scooters or other types of technologies, but, like, I have a really hard time buying criticism of something. Someone's like, oh, I just don't like it. As a legislator, as a policymaker, I really do. Like you're coming to every council meeting, you're like, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. I hate it. I mean, you've seen these meetings on YouTube, I'm sure, right? And we hear them, and that public process is really important because it helps get trust into the community. But sometimes those loud, vocal minority can really scare off the majority. But when I go back and I actually talk with people, I'm like, well, have you ever used one? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, well, I have, and I like it, and I'm in this seat, so sorry, you know. And I think that's a political will as well, because I think a lot of younger people or people in our cities at all ages are utilizing new technologies to better their lives. There are seniors and people with disabilities that get their medicine through different little robots that take them because of pilot programs. I agree with the pilot program. We love a pilot program, and it works, right? Because most of the time you can justify for why you're investing these dollars, and it does show. And a lot of the times, I mean, Jackie hit it right on. A lot of regulations at the state through these big agencies are just so outdated, and they're not there to help innovation. They're kind of to stymie it. But that's where I think local cities and COGS and other community partners are able to say, no, like, let's show where this is actually being used for good. And so, and a case in point is, I said to one of my colleagues on the council, I won't name which one, but I said, well, have you ever used a Waymo? Like, you literally every day you say how bad drivers in Los Angeles are. You're like, oh my God, I almost got hit by this person, there was this and that. And I go, well, just take a Waymo. Like, I feel more safe. And this is not an ad for Waymo, by the way, but they have their own issues. But like, or just take another, just use it, right? Because they don't necessarily agree with it. But I was like, just use it, right? And you might feel a little safer. And it goes back to friends and family that do it. And they're like I made my mom do it, right? And she's from a small town in Wisconsin, like 7,000 people. Like, to see someone not behind the driver's seat, like, is the scariest thing since, like, anything coming back. And I didn't tell her, and we did it. And she's like banging down the doors of her local community council in Wisconsin to like get these types of technologies into rural spaces because they help her because she can't see at night.
Yeah.
And so it's that type of innovation and regulation that needs to expand beyond major urban corridors as well.
Yeah. But Tom, I mean, can you help us at all? Like, how do we accelerate policy, though? If there's anything slower than policy, it's permitting. So how do we accelerate? How do we move more swiftly? What are the thoughts on that?
So the starting point, I think, is to be educated, right? So a lot of the work that Volterra does is to educate other stakeholders that then become partners that we need to work with to achieve the outcome necessary to ultimately bring these facilities online. But part of our challenge is also to be educated by those stakeholders and partners that we're working with. I will tell you that there is not a single permitting office or planning department that we've engaged in that has educated us that they are well-resourced and have a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah.
Right? It's the opposite.
Yeah.
This is par for the course, and so if we're coming at them hard and trying to jump the queue and push them hard to do things in a different way, that's not terribly well received. What is well received is when we can understand what some of their specific bottlenecks are and work with them or work kind of not with them to go to their city council or their mayor's office and help educate some of those leaders and decision makers on where those bottlenecks are, where the permitting office or planning department needs help to be able to meet the moment. That is very well received, even if those resources don't make their way in. So some of that is just, quite frankly, working with people at a human level to understand their experience and what the process looks like from the inside. That only goes so far, though. And so ultimately, it is those stakeholders at the mayor's office level or mayoral level, city council level. In some cases, it's commissioners on planning commissions to then go support their permitting offices or planning departments to do some of these things. And that's not to, again, jump the queue. It's to say, hey, do we really need to do all these 10 things that we've done in the past when we're looking at a new type of project that we've never encountered before? And so often the experience that we want to have, we don't have it all the time, is that our projects can sometimes provide permission to some of these stakeholders to do things differently or to ask for help or resources in a different way. So this is not rocket science, like this is kind of a slow push, but that opportunity exists to sort of change the paradigm a little bit.
Go ahead, Jackie.
just one thing that we constantly, I thought that was great. We constantly blame cities. If, for those of you from California, you know that the state legislature has done hundreds of bills in the last couple of years that affect the planning departments. From the councils of governments, we can't even get our community development directors to come to a meeting because they're so understaffed. All of these rules that come down have a price, and no one talks about it. They say cities are slow or don't work together. And so we really need, what we try to do is we try to bring into a meeting of all of our cities some of these constraints and barriers. But before, in micromobility, in that world, we had the scooter companies just dumping scooters on streets. And now we are trying to promote micromobility, and not one city in the South Bay allows sharing because of the terrible way that the private companies came into the area. And so we need a better partnership. That's really what's going on. Cities do not have the resources, and we ought to be fighting for cities to have more resources so they can work more closely with the private sector.
And these things bring in revenue. And that's the good thing, is when you work together, they bring in the revenue to allow for it. And I could not agree more with Jackie on the micromobility piece where, when they were coming in and they were just dumping scooters. It really caused not only a community backlash, a business backlash. People had to do PR in the way that said, no, this is the way in which we can do X, Y, and Z. All really good intentions, right? So I can speak only for the city of West Hollywood. That's why Beverly Hills banned them, because they were tired of it. But and other cities have that right because they're not doing it, not the cities, but the companies aren't. And sadly, these can pay for people in the permitting office to have jobs and all that. But the one clear example is we had to do a pilot program from our micromobility standpoint, even though we had the will to push it forward, because the community was so upset about it, right? And for fine structures, we created a program where we went out and did it ourselves, and we finally got to the point. And then we had 2 scooter companies. Now we just have 1, but we literally were on it was really bad faith negotiations with these corporations who were kind of doing more harm than good to the topic. And so we want things to go fast. We would love things to go fast, but even the most liberal of us trying to say, okay, yes, and have a hard time sitting on a dais saying, I'm going to vote for this project, but still I don't know what the outcome is for my residents. And that's a really hard position to be in as a policymaker.
Right. And I'd like you to speak a little bit about the experience in Europe. So one of the things we've talked about is we want to accelerate policy. We want to accelerate some of these technology innovations, some of these new opportunities, but we want to remain grounded in the public good and the public outcome. So we talked a bit about autonomous vehicles. We want to make sure that they, have a space to grow and a space to expand, but we want them to come back to the solid backbone of public transit. And how are we not, and we've heard this before of, some of these new innovations, the neighborhood electric vehicles, the scooters and others that, this is competing with transit, and therefore we need to, kind of knock down these innovations. What is that sweet spot where we can invite the innovations to come, but we can still really bolster those public priorities that we have of public transit, of affordable mobility, of equitable opportunity?
Well, I come from a reality that is totally different on the organization of services. For example, more or less half of the moves in Milan, but in many other European cities, are made by public transport. It is for everybody. You can use it for poor people, but you can use it for rich ones. I used to go every day to work by subway. It's normal. It's a different system. But it's also a system that should be upgraded because it's expensive. Half of the services is subsidized by the public. It costs year after year more. It's hard to find drivers. So the idea is that new technologies like autonomous vehicle can help public transport to the next step. We have some infrastructure that will last for centuries, subways, tram lines, fantastic. But the buses organization could be improved. We have weak services in the night time. And something that is typical of both cities, European, American, is you have one kind of service and one kind of mentality in the inner city and a different approach outside. In European cities, mainly is connected to public transport. For example, all the cities are democratic also because they support public services, while outside they say we are crazy because they don't need it, we ban some kind of cars, etc. Autonomous vehicle can also give new services to those areas with the weak demand and weaker services. So it's also, and it should be also, a way to enlarge the place where you have services like urban citizens. I think this is the main challenge we should face. The idea that public transport, even in European cities and in more recent years, should be helped by autonomous vehicles to enlarge the places where services are good to be used as an alternative to private car.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll say a few things. So, Volterra's job is to bring charging facilities online to enable electrified transportation. Our sweet spot has been rideshare fleets. We're happy to support buses, trucks, you name it, right? It's just about moving people in an electrified manner, right? Changing the fuel paradigm, changing the emissions paradigm, and supporting our customers who are doing that. So I would say we don't really care how people get around, except that it's electric or zero emissions, right?
Right.
But I think that when we're thinking about entering some of these new cities, helping some of our customers enter new markets and provide new services, there's not a whole lot of cohesion necessarily between existing transportation policies, existing transit systems, and some of these new services and technologies. And there's such incredible opportunity. I will share this. I am actually a transit junkie, but it's only in so many cities or on certain types of business trips where I feel like I have enough time to use the transit system and that I don't have to take a meeting, so I can be on a train or maybe a bus where I don't have private space. But so I think there are a lot of opportunities to, I hesitate to say rethink transit, that's a big challenge, but to think about why people who could and might want to take transit aren't, right? And that's because they can't work, right? They don't have silent space. They're concerned about, in some cases, safety. And so there are a lot of opportunities with some of the new technologies, new modes of transportation, to check some of those boxes that aren't being checked by traditional transit technologies. But there's no reason why all of those systems can't work in a complementary fashion. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for cities and planners to really think to the future of how to put all these pieces together to serve the outcomes that they're looking for, which tend to be less vehicles on roads, safer rides, and less emissions.
I'm going to maybe be a heretic. I want to let the data speak for themselves. And in the South Bay, we have a 1 to 3% transit ridership.
Yeah.
Before COVID, we had 7% telework. That was before COVID. So we had more people teleworking than we had in transit. There's nothing wrong with rethinking transit. It not only does not work in certain areas, but it also is absolutely breaking the bank. I was the chair of the rail systems. We built beautiful rail systems. They're all coming to where they need to be refurbished. And the minute they don't get refurbished, people will stop riding them. So we are bursting the bank. We have Waymo, we have Dial-A-Ride. When you hold a phone up and you can get a toothpicks delivered to your house tomorrow, you live a different way than you ever lived before. We ought to think about the way people live. And I want to just throw something out that no one ever talks about, and that is Waymo, which I also took and thought it was great. is not, I don't think it's expected to be personally owned. It's expected to be a shared vehicle. And I would just imagine, think about the way we live. At 10 o'clock at night or whatever, you're going to want to get a bottle of milk. You're not going to wait for a Waymo. You're going to get in your neighborhood electric vehicle, or you're going to get in on your bike or something really simple that doesn't add congestion, that's fun to ride, and you're going to go to the store and get it. We will always need micromobility. We have to create it as a mode. It fits perfectly with the automated vehicle, and I think that we have to reimagine our system.
Yeah, I don't know where to follow that. She dropped the mic a little bit. That wasn't heretical. That was lovely. And this is a safe space to say, because I agree. Like when I go to New York and I don't ever have to get in a car, like I'm in this like euphoric state the whole time, right? I'm just kind of like, oh, I didn't have to ever drive today. Thank God. I mean, I live in West Hollywood. For me, I mean, the dream is to like get on the Koreatown station right down here, little Tokyo station, and take it home, right? It doesn't exist because I'm going to be in the train for like an hour. It's just silly. I'll be in my car for an hour, which sucks. And the private space thing is a huge argument that a lot of people hear. But then when I get to Hollywood and Highland, I have to either walk all the way, and I live on the east side of West Hollywood, so like La Brea and that whole area. So I'm closer to that area, but it's still a 20-minute walk or a 10-minute scooter or a 10-minute bike ride, right? And so the first mile, last mile thing is always going to be plaguing us because we're building systems on top of systems on top of systems on top of systems. And so we want to fund that. We want to push for it. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, California is in last place in many of these ways because we're the most regulated state, one of, if not the most regulated state. We have a lot of protections for right reasons, but ultimately, we are finding the cost of building systems on top of systems to be astronomical. There is a reason why the purple line still is not open. There is a reason line, and I just forgot the color that's supposed to go down to Torrance. What's it called?
It's not a C line.
Yes, it changes all the time, but the C line to the K line, they still have not chosen the extension of the Metro K line extension that would take you actually to West Hollywood. We hope they choose the San Vicente route, but that ties into housing production and business and economic development. So it is then the main question of this conversation is why is it taking so long, right? And that's then where bureaucracies are just bloating it to the point where they just can't make a decision. And they don't make a decision strategically because politicians don't want to have to say something during an election year and piss off people. And then they don't want to say something and not have it be paid for because by the time the K-Line Northern extension is ideally a shovels in the ground, I'm dead. Right? I will be dead. I fully am prepared for that. And that's sad, right? Because we are trying to advocate for change. And as an elected leader who wants to streamline or move things faster at maybe their own political expense, it's harder because the systems that then we're trying to move faster are not actually doing it in the long run.
Right. So, last question from me, and then we'll take questions from the audience. But assuming the industry is always going to be ahead of the public sector, right? Who had that robot on your bingo card 4 years ago, right?
It's great. I love it. I just already can imagine the emails I'm going to get. It's very bright. So I just have to say, take the lumens down just a little bit. I'll give you back some critical feedback you'll get from a planning commissioner. Other than that, you'll be okay.
But in any event, there's going to be many more innovations like that around the corner, right? Things that we can't even conceptualize today, things that our regulations are completely ill-equipped to handle, whether it's infrastructure or mobility devices or whatever it is. So what are some, can you give some concrete examples of how you can really co-create regulatory guidance with industry who's going to be ahead of public policymakers? And how are we able to kind of set that table so that we can maintain and reinforce the public good while still, leaving the door open to those things that may yet come?
Yeah. I'll just go off real quick. Solar, electric charging. This is not an ad. I don't know if you have contracts with my city, so if you do, I apologize. I'll recuse myself. But we are seeing a couple of things. You have the 2035 rule, which has been thrown out the window by the federal administration, so who knows what's happening there. You have an energy crisis with energy companies leaving the state of California because of the cost to do business here. It's happening in the South Bay. It's impacting our fuel standards. And people, even the most environmentally friendly, are going to the Air Resources Board in gas-driven cars versus EV cars because you can't afford them. The rebate systems aren't there anymore, and frankly, no one can afford it with the rise in cost of everything. So what am I saying about this? The one thing that we actually as local cities can do could be to build out better EV and solar charging infrastructure systems and new development, redevelopment, and existing street patterns and urban landscapes to allow for people who do have that capability to charge their cars more frequently. You see it in Palm Springs and in other areas, but we don't have that kind of in this urban core of Los Angeles. Specifically, the Tesla charging station. I'm not doing an advertisement for Tesla, but it's busy all the time because that's the one place where people can actually go charge their cars in that way. And so it's popular, for lack of a better word, because of that. We are trying to install as much EV charging in all of our development in West Hollywood at a higher clip because we know our residents want this and there's no other place to do it. So why don't we make money, you make money, and then after we get more cars that are gas fueled off the road. And so we have to do what we can locally really quickly. And I think that's the easiest thing cities can actually do. Beverly Hills has free parking lots all over the place that are $2. They're trying to install more public charging stations. Manhattan Beach they have them all over their parking stations. And so it's an easy win for our cities and I think private and public technology.
Yeah, Pier Francesco, can you share really where industry and public policymakers are coming together to kind of see the future and anticipate it a little bit?
I would go on the same point. We had a decade where the environmental aspect were all the center of our initiative. Now, okay, environmental, but we need the affordable part. We need to involve citizens in the change. And some of the changes happened increasing the cost for people too much of what they can afford. So the new alliance is also to create a system that is cheaper or it doesn't become even more expensive for citizens. That is the main challenge at the moment we are facing. And it also can save innovation because if it is not for all, it could be considered a sort of enemy by many citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at my Council of Governments, we try to bring together people as a heads up. I always say you shouldn't have to go to a conference necessarily to learn. Let's learn in the South Bay. So private sector innovators are welcome at our meetings to tell us what to plan for. And I think that's really important. I think cities are not, they're just not there yet, and we need to sort of learn together. And then we create like a competition among our cities. Who's going to adopt it faster? But I think that it's. I had another thought which I've now forgotten, and Did you have something to say?
But
Okay.
Tom, you've been doing a lot of this. So what's your advice?
Yeah, well, a few things. So again, there's a bandwidth issue.
Yeah.
Every city, many utilities we work with too, they just don't have enough staff, and so I think a lot of people are frustrated. Oh, it takes too long. It doesn't actually take that long to do the thing. It's just that there are 100 other things like in the queue ahead of that thing, right? And so, again, I spoke a little bit earlier about when a Volterra or other representative of industries, especially one that is doing things that a city really wants, a utility really wants, it gives them permission to react and leverage us coming to them to change the way that they're doing something. Absent that, which is a reactive approach, for cities or other government entities or agencies to really sort of work proactively, that really requires a pretty strong mandate or directive from elected leaders to staff or otherwise to do that. But at the end of the day, it's, in my view, really cultural. So even if the resources don't exist, if the culture exists that, hey, we know we need to innovate, we know we need to change, we know business as usual isn't working for not just the people who are coming to us, but us ourselves, like there is real space and opportunity to make those changes. But if the culture is more like, hey, we've got these guardrails, we've got this process, we're stuck, it can be really difficult, and it really does take a new legislative directive, or we'll call it kind of the nuclear option, to change that business as usual culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's the saying, right? Culture eats policy for lunch or breakfast. Are there any questions? Anyone in the audience? Yeah, go ahead. Here, let me give you this.
Cool, thanks. Hey, thanks everybody. My question sort of builds on, I think, what you were already talking about, but it sounded like and having worked for a city in the past and now work for a private developer or for a private company, seems like a lot of these things, if the cities are overwhelmed, and then the cities also want to have some control, right? They want to have micro-mobility permits to give out. They want to have some control over like where these charging lots go, but then they don't have the capacity to do it. I mean, is there some reason that we should be pushing more for like up-leveling that, or having by right in more locations where if you meet certain specs, it's just to check the box and go? Would you advocate for that or not advocate for that for any reason?
By right is like not allowed in the South Bay. We are a totally local control. People elect their representatives in order to do the work to represent them. I think what we need to do is we need to push together for more resources. You can't have new laws and just keep dumping them on the same place. And I think we're being let down. I don't know if they're here, but for groups like the League of California Cities and our lobbyist groups ought to be representing cities to say that this is an untenable situation. We're hurting the private sector. We know it. But to give up the local control is not what local officials are elected to do.
I'll just react. So Volterra's timelines are our customers' timelines. So our customers dictate when we need to be able to deliver a project and all of the stuff that we need to figure out to make that happen. At this point, Volterra works, we use the term ministerial rather than by right, but we work exclusively from a land use approval standpoint in a ministerial context. We do not have time. We cannot meet our customers' needs if we're going through a conditional use process that has a number of different stage gates and an uncertain outcome.
But I'm not saying that cities shouldn't do that. Cities should be looking at their processes, but it should not be from someplace else.
Yeah, and I think that we talked about this earlier, is that a lot of our zoning codes aren't even updated to the point to match a lot of what people would want to do by right. You know, and I think that if you do it right, the public process right, you can get to the outcome where everyone's like, we didn't give up local control. We actually worked with our businesses, our community, our private enterprise. We did this, this, and this. That's on the city to do. So that way, when you come into the city and you're like, I have this lot right here that's perfect for X, everyone's already kind of agreed to it and it's done. Now, there is a lot of pushback saying, well, that takes a long time. Absolutely, right? And it's kind of, we're trying to ask ourselves, this is the process, we can do it as fast as we can, versus a lot of the hiccups that do come when you streamline or do things by right, especially when cities are so understaffed right now. We actually have to go, I've seen a lot of the number of the times we have to go back and fix some things, unfortunately.
No, I think, we spend half of the time protesting that we pay too much taxes, and the other half saying that we should have the best bureaucracy ever. We should need more new people, paying them more. Is it easy to find people adapt to create good rules for technology? We don't know exactly how they work, etc. So, of course, public sector is slower in the change, and it's easy to complain about it. And of course, we try to every time to get better processes. I would be clear on the fact that it's impossible to have a system that is perfect as you say. Our customer asks for that. We are ready for that. For sure, public administration cannot be so ready to do as you want that part, because that is your only priority, and it's one of the several priorities of administration that is, I'd say anyway, a larger company. So we should find the right way to let you complain, yes, but in an acceptable way for your point of view and for the point of view of your customer, but knowing we can't follow that way because you need a change of system that it's not in the economical possibility of every public administration at the moment, either USA or Europe, I'd say.
So I want to thank this panel. I think it's been really, valuable to hear this. Some of the things that I'm taking away are, having the policies in place so that there's a predictable route forward is a really important way to kind of invite some of these technology enhancements that we want. So making sure that there's a linear and straight and predictable process to do that, to, importance of saying yes, and sometimes taking a risk and being a policy innovator and providing that sort of policy laboratory. And understanding that it's an iterative process. And then I think, Jackie, what you're bringing is saying, go ahead and set the policy for the future that you want. So knowing that what was the case in the past is not the way that people will be in the future. And so really being an enabler and setting those policies as an enabling tool. So I think this is the kind of partnership, public and private, that we need. Yes, as a former public official, and I saw you in the front row, yes, fund your public agencies. We'll all do better work that way. But if we can thank the panel.